Paul. Thanks for agreeing to speak to us. And Paul, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Dr. Paul Dorfman. I'm Associate Fellow, Science Policy Research Unit at University of Sussex. I'm Chair of the International Nuclear Consulting Group. I served as Secretary to the UK Scientific Advisory Committee examining radiation risk from internal emitters. I'm advisor currently to the Irish government on radiation risk, and I have advised the French government on reactor dismantling and also governments in the Arabian Gulf. I've also worked for a long time with the UK Ministry of Defence in decommissioning, dismantling the laid-up nuclear submarine flotilla.
Thanks, Paul, for introducing yourself. So, Paul, I have several questions, so I will start straight away. So my first question is, what do you think about the latest developments regarding Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine?
It's very worrying. Radiation protection professionals, the people of Ukraine, the people of Europe, and also the people of Russia should be very worried about the situation. That's because of the near and present risk of potential radiation pollution if, under certain circumstances, if missiles hit or if there's a false flag, a Russian false flag operation that goes wrong. So it's to say that one is worried is perhaps an understatement.
So what do you think are the threats to nuclear safety at this power plant, and how can they be averted?
This is the first instance that a nuclear power plant has come under direct military assault. There is no nuclear plant in the world that can defend against a concerted military attack. These are not modern reactors either, and they don't necessarily have modern defense in depth as well. There are key problems. The first is clearly sort of direct hit. There are also key problems about the reactor cooling, and also there are key problems, perhaps very importantly, about the less well-defended, highly radioactive spent fuel ponds. Now, that said, it's understood that now all but one, I believe, of the reactors are scrammed. In other words, they've gone into a form of sort of cold storage. What that means is that they no longer need the extent of cooling that a reactor in action, in operation, would need, which significantly lowers the risk in terms of all but one of the reactors. The same is not necessarily true of spent fuel ponds, which without question need fueling for many years because of the heat generated by the used reactor rooms.
And Paul, and what would be the worst case scenario if this shelling continues and something happens?
The worst case, it needn't be so. We may get through this. However, the worst case scenario, one should always consider worst cases in the context of nuclear, is a significant radiation pollution event, which could land on Ukraine, which could land on the soil, the water, the air, the cities of Russia. And that really needs to be taken into consideration by the invading forces. The modeling from Zaporizhzhia in the event of a catastrophic event, one sees Central Europe potentially at risk, and even as far as the Middle East. So one has seen before what happened with Chernobyl. With Fukushima, we were lucky. So there is a significant worry, but as I say, The majority of the reactors have been put into cold shutdown, and therefore an element of the risk has been reduced.
I see. And what's your view of the latest IAEA visit to these facilities?
The IAEA seem to have done their best, but at the end of the day, the IAEA lead Grossi spent 4 hours, and then he said he had all the information he needed, which can't be the case. They left a few inspectors behind, and they, I suppose, are doing their best. But the problem is the IAEA have never discussed or regulated for a military attack on a nuclear plant. And to a certain extent, their hands are tied. There's not much that they can do except ask for the international community to support in some way a no-fire zone around Zaporizhzhia. So to a certain extent, the IAEA, there's not much that they can do at the moment.
But in the recent presentation that they put forward, I think it was a couple of days ago, they showed this graph, and they showed that the level of risk is very high for facilities. I saw in one of circles for facility security level was like, I think it was red. Is it something to worry?
Well, so far there haven't been substantial radiation release. I mean, there hasn't. However, what you've got is the largest nuclear plant in Europe, with sets of reactors, with the reactors themselves, with their spent fuel ponds, with the intermediate level waste, with the low level waste, and we're in the middle of a shooting war where Russia has invaded Ukraine. One understands also that the Russian forces are firing from the Zaporizhzhia positions, even so far as firing on the local towns where the families of the Zaporizhzhia workers are sheltering. There's also reports of very worrying events in Zaporizhzhia itself. And the Russian forces are known to be unstable. The IAEA have said that, everybody has said that this is a very, very worrying situation. And so far we've been lucky, but luck is not a strategy.
And do you think that one of the proposals to have an agreement to demilitarize this area of this power plant is a good solution?
It's absolutely necessary to have a no-fly zone around Zaporizhzhia as soon as possible. But that will be dictated by the Russian invading forces because they occupy Zaporizhzhia at the moment.
And what can Ukraine do in such a situation?
Ukraine's hands are tied to a certain extent. Ukraine has maintained power to Zaporizhzhia in order to keep cooling and also to allow for one reactor to provide power to the Ukraine grid. Clearly, Ukraine, there are various reports about who is doing the shelling. I cannot believe that Ukraine is shelling Zaporizhzhia. That would be the height of madness. In my view, it looks much more like GRU Russian false flag operation, doing what the Russians normally do. But the very fact that a nuclear power plant is under, a civil nuclear power plant is being weaponized, is under attack, has huge consequences in the future, hopefully once we get through this, for nuclear worldwide. Because in an unstable world, nuclear power, given that there are practical alternatives, looks very dodgy. The reality is, last year, 84% of all new power capacity addition worldwide was renewable, with nuclear nowhere. Renewables come at maybe a quarter to a fifth the price of nuclear, and doesn't have all of the back end, the waste, the security, the safety, and now the military weaponization problems. So if we get through this event, like so many events that are happening in Ukraine, if we get through this, maybe we can see a better way forward for ourselves, for Ukraine and for the world.
And is there something that Western countries can do to help Ukraine to address this current situation, you think?
It's very difficult. Everybody, the UN, there's been an international agreement. Countries worldwide have called for a ceasefire zone around Zaporizhzhia as soon as possible. And so far, the calls have gone unanswered. It's a wicked problem. By wicked, I mean it's a multifactorial problem, embracing the military situation, embracing the energy situation, embracing the political situation in Russia and also elsewhere. So it's a hugely complex problem that to a certain extent, Ukraine are facing up to, and one has to admire the way that people and policy of Ukraine are standing up to, in this very, very difficult and dangerous situation.
I see, Paul. And Paul, how can civilian population can prepare in case if something happens? I heard that the EU provided some support, some local authorities provided some medical supplies, the special pills. But I mean, in case of this worst case scenario, the consequences can be huge, right?
Yes, the consequences can be huge. I mean, the immediate danger is in the immediate area and to the immediate workers in the area. And then one can model where any potential radiation plume goes. So it is absolutely key, it is absolutely essential, and I believe this has happened in Ukraine, but potentially not in Russia, to distribute stable iodine tablets. Now this is important because iodine 131 is a kind of a key radiological pollutant that is emitted if there's a problem. What stable iodine tablets do is that it blocks to a great degree the internal metabolization of that form of radioactive pollution. Now this is what we didn't see in Chernobyl. And afterwards, we saw significant childhood thyroid problems. So it is absolutely key for everyone to have access to, and for that to be, and for stable iodine tablets to be distributed. If anything does happen, the key is to stay indoors, close windows, if possible, have bottled drinking water, if possible, have canned food, and hopefully wait out the few days of key danger. Travel in that circumstance could be problematic because one is out in the open. After that, then one sees where the plume goes and what has or hasn't happened.
I see. And you mentioned also that the wind might blow, so it all depends and also on weather conditions, because if something happens, then this radiation can go in any direction, right? It can go to Russia, to Ukraine, to Central Europe. We don't know, right?
That's absolutely true. Unfortunately, because of the nature of Zaporizhzhia, it's unlike Chernobyl. For example, Chernobyl was a graphite reactor, which means that it's much more it volatilized. It blew up much quicker and it can be blown much farther. Now, Zaporizhzhia has a much greater radiological inventory. There's much more bad stuff there, but it's a different form of reactor, and so the plume, it looks like the plume would settle in the immediate area more likely, and then blow farther afield. Which means that, yes, it could absolutely go to Russia. There's no question about it. And of course, winds can change. So that if a false flag Russian operation were to go wrong, the Russian community would be in as much risk as anybody else.
I see. And this nuclear power station is one of the largest in Europe, right?
It is the largest nuclear It is the largest nuclear station in Europe, and all that implies.
Well, and Paul, I run out of questions, and maybe is it something worth mentioning that you would like to mention, something important that people should hear?
I see you laughing. You have to laugh sometimes. You know, I mean, I'm not sure that I think we've covered everything. I think all I can say really is that you know, people everywhere are staggered by the robust courage of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, and one hopes and prays that you and we all get through this as safely as we can.
All right, Paul, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for responding to all my questions.
Thank you, Max.